Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Brandon Roberts back on the show. It's been a while. 4 years ago, he came on the podcast, talked all about sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Now he's back and we're digging into some of his future research and things that he's been thinking about. He has a PhD in muscle biology. He's a natural bodybuilder. He is a prime candidate to come on the Revive Stronger podcast, and it's a really, really great chat that we had. First, we just dig into some of what he's been up to with his own training, nutrition, that sort of thing. And then we really dive into a question that's maybe come up on the podcast, but it's been fleeting. We haven't gone into it in depth. And now we really get into the weeds of this question where we're talking about NSAIDs and things like paracetamol and their relationship with muscle gain and gym performance. And that's an area that Brandon has been working on and he's gone quite in depth on and will be doing future research on as well. We talk about that and maybe some other things that you can do to restore your recovery, joint and ligament health, this sort of thing. So if you're interested in all of that, that's going to allow you to train longer and harder, then you should definitely listen to this podcast, and it's a fantastic chat. Now, before we dig into that, I just want to remind you guys that at Revive Stronger, we are online coaches. We take that seriously. We keep everything very personal through our communication channels, where we have video weekly check-ins, where you can communicate to us nice and clearly. And we obviously take care of everything from your training, nutrition, supplementation. If we want to dig into that, we like to look over form videos. If you're a competitor, we're going into peak week. Everything is managed. And again, we like this dynamic relationship where we also want to answer your questions, educate you along the way, so you can also take everything you've learned, apply it maybe to your clients or to you in future. So if you're interested in very comprehensive online coaching, then definitely check out. That will always be linked in the description below. But without further ado, let's get into the chat with Brandon. Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Brandon Roberts back on the show. It's been a while. It's actually 4 years since we recorded our last episode, Brandon, which I can't believe. I keep saying this, I keep repeating it to guests who I haven't had on a while, that I can't believe time has flied by so quickly. But it was episode 174. We're talking about sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Yeah, I shouldn't have left it so long, but I think you've been busy too.
Yeah. Thanks for having me back. 4 years. Holy smokes. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. And that was back when like the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy stuff was really popping. It's kind of died a little bit since then. But again, yeah, thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. And so people who aren't aware of Brandon, he has a PhD in muscle biology. So like got the academic side completely there, but is also a natural bodybuilder, so competes regularly himself. I think I was just saying last time you came on, I think you'd recently just like done a competitive season where, again, looking completely shredded and diced. So I guess it would be interesting to hear like a life update, but also like a bodybuilding update in those past 4 years. Kind of what's been going on with you, Brandon?
Yeah. So I'm up in Boston now. I do a little bit more like military-oriented research. Always have the heart and soul of a bodybuilder. Always interested in hypertrophy. Working on a couple different projects, but I think about 4 years ago I had just competed, and then obviously we had COVID. So I had a good season. I think I took overall and won, but I didn't get my pro card, which is always kind of the goal, and then to compete at that next level. So there's a little bit left in the tank, I think. But with COVID, couldn't make any gains, right? And then the next year it was kind of like not great either. So I've really only been training like what I would say super well for about a year and a half. And as you know, Steve, like when you're on the upper like levels, it's really hard to just stack on muscle. So I may have put on a kilo of muscle over that time, which is enough to show up in like on stage, but probably not quite where I want to be at. So I think right now I'm still just like building a little bit. I think maybe next year or so might compete. It's gotta get the family on board, because it's like,
yes,
it's like an endeavor, right? And nowadays you prep for like 6 months or something. So that's kind of my update. I am like, I did kind of like a comparison side by side for yesterday and like a couple years ago, and I'm like, no, I've put on some muscle, but still always room to improve. Yeah,
that makes so much sense. Yeah, I think it was like the COVID period, I think for some people they managed to like scrape through, and I did my best in like the little flat that we were in at the time, and like trying to get as much equipment as possible. And some people landed on their feet, whether or not they owned a home gym already or had access to a gym like privately that they could get to. But some people, I remember at the time I was getting frustrated because people were like, if you want it bad enough, you'll continue your bodybuilding throughout this time. I'm like, hey, like people have families, they have like only a certain amount of space. Like you can't just want it bad enough. Like there's some real limitations that people have. So I guess you were one of those people to just, I'm assuming you really wanted to continue, of course, but it just wasn't there for you at the time.
Yeah, and I even tried, oh man, do you remember when bands got really popular and like everybody was getting them on Amazon and stuff?
Yes.
I tried like band workouts and like these are miserable. And then I ended up like tweaking a muscle and I was like, this is super stupid. So yeah, again, tried, but didn't have a home gym. Our gym shut down. Like even within our research facility where we had a gym, like a full-fledged gym, it was like, no, you can't go there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's so frustrating, and it feels like a, I don't know, distant memory now, thankfully, but such a wild time. I've still got all the equipment. It's like in storage somewhere in this house, and I need to really sell it because I'm like, I'll keep it just in case. I'm like, I haven't actually got space now. We've moved into this house. I don't know where I'd use it. It's like an old Victorian house with a barbell's not going to fit in any one room, let alone be safe to lift. So yeah, fingers crossed nothing like that ever happens again to us. With, I guess, actually interesting with bands, because I guess now, especially with the research coming out, which I'm sure you've seen, with kind of the kind of resurgence of stretch mediated hypertrophy, training at long muscle lengths, and like bands being almost the opposite in terms of ideal for kind of trying to train with load at long lengths. Is that something you have been incorporating within your own training? Have you experimented with anything? Like, have you changed anything with your own training or programming for clients?
Yeah, so I have I've incorporated a little bit more training at length. I think there's a couple studies that have come out recently and it's like, all right, I'm not sold on it being like de facto way better. But I do think, in a well-rounded program, now I've shifted, especially like my arm training, to more long length training. So the tricep overhead extensions, stuff like that, a little more cable work. Um, but I am very interested in like where that's going. And I think there's even, I think I saw it yesterday, like a multi-site training study with like all the big names like Schoenfeld
Yes.
and Helms and all them. Yeah. So um, that's always been a dream of mine, just to do like a multi-site study. But yeah, I think it's coming. I again, easy to incorporate, worth it, probably not detrimental. So I've changed my training probably a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's where most people have gone. It's kind of like, again, if something's been working so well, if it ain't broke, it's not a case of don't fix it, but maybe just slightly tweak it, modify it to make it even better. And yeah, that study will hopefully confirm some things for us, because I know some people are like, hey, maybe it's just a short-term adaptation and things like this, whereas this will be a long-term study, which is going to just give us a few more insights to that as well and see what's kind of going on. So yeah, that's great. And then in terms of your kind of study and things like that, you mentioned you're working more with the military. And is there anything there that's kind of been exciting for you?
Yeah, actually. So, when we study hypertrophy and stuff, bodybuilders are like the elite, right? And you're always like, let me get some bodybuilder muscle or some like, some high level people, and they're always like, you want to take muscle and study me? No, I don't like, I don't know. Maybe sometimes you can get it, sometimes you can't. But with the military, I'm working with some like special forces and stuff, and like they're all about it. They're like, you want to optimize me? Please take it. Like, yes, we support whatever you want to do. And they're much like the physique community, where like they're really wanting to elevate like whatever it is. Like if it's a new supplement, if it's like, you see like the different methods come out, and you're like, oh, I don't know if that works. Like they're trying it. So that's a lot of the line of research, is figuring out what works more from a performance perspective than like a muscle growth perspective, and implementing that type of stuff. So it's been a lot of fun.
Is there anything, I don't know if this is something you would have looked at, is there anything like with sleep and things like this? Is there like, because I guess for those guys, I'm so ignorant to all of this, but like out in the field, they're trying to maximize like recovery, but they also have like probably not much time to sleep. I don't know if there's anything you've worked on in that regard.
Yeah, so we've got a couple studies going on like just simple sleep extension, which if you think about like, and you've talked about it on your podcast, sleep's so critical, and we know that. So if you're only getting 4 hours a night, you're probably not in a good spot, right? Especially extended periods. And then you layer on like caloric deficit, um, real environmental stress like altitude, heat, cold, people shooting at you. That's always stressful. You get this kind of like multi-level thing. So we're working on when you're not out in the field, like, hey, let's optimize sleep at home so that you're prepared and you're ready. And then when you do have to suffer because you can't control it, you're not as like beat down essentially. So yeah, they have, and the whole like military complex has issues with sleep, just like general society. So working on that is always a good thing. So
yeah, that makes tons of sense. Cool. So yeah, I mean, the main subject that I had to bring you on about was talking about something that I think might have like popped up here and there in some Q&As maybe on the podcast, but it's never really been like a deep dive. And I think it's a good reminder for people because it's essentially something that people might take on a very regular basis in terms of like a day-to-day kind of thing that they might be taking. So basically talking about the relationship between kind of NSAIDs, things like paracetamol as well, and their relationship to muscle gain, gym performance, because I know that's been an area you're looking at. And so a lot of people will be taking this, whether or not it's like for a headache, maybe a muscle ache or like a joint ache, and they're trying to reduce inflammation or kind of increase pain tolerance. And I always like to say for every gimme, there's a gotcha. So it's like nothing in life comes for free. And it's kind of like that for NSAIDs, I think, where it's like, hey, there might even be a negative impact on some of these adaptations that we're trying to get for hypertrophy, maybe similar to something that's super popular at the moment. It's like cold therapy stuff. It's like, hey, doing that post-workout, it might not be the best thing if you're trying to kind of grow as much muscle as possible. So yeah, I'd love to hear your current thoughts surrounding the use of those in regards to people trying to maximize like muscle growth.
Yeah. So I have like this big giant grant to study NSAIDs, and so it's kind of multifaceted. But one of the aims is like muscle growth, muscle recovery. Um, and so what we kind of see, and this is in athletes, recreational, elite, doesn't really matter, is a fairly high NSAID use. So it can be anywhere from like 30 to 50% of people will just take NSAIDs for pain or just to feel better or inflammation, like you said. Now, when you take NSAIDs, there are a couple different types. So you have like your ibuprofen, and then that's probably the most standard, the acetaminophen, it's in America. And then you have kind of like other ones that aren't prescribed as much. And the basis of these is blocking these COX enzymes. And so each one has a stronger kind of affinity for these COX enzymes. And that's where we're trying to figure out, is one NSAID better than another, for example, for muscle growth or endurance adaptations or recovery, pain, things like that. So that's kind of the big picture of the research. And so if we look at the literature, there's been quite a few studies on NSAIDs, which is nice, especially in the muscle growth area. And what they've all kind of found acutely, at least, so you do an exercise session, maybe you take a NSAID before or after, and then you look at like muscle protein synthesis. That's pretty common. Most of them find that there's like a blunting of muscle protein synthesis, so it doesn't go up as much, which you would think, all right, that means if I'm kind of hindering that, just like the cold therapy, I think was shown recently, I'm not going to grow as much muscle over the long term, right? And so there's really only a couple studies looking at like long-term resistance training adaptations, and they're kind of mixed. So we're kind of hoping to fill that gap a little bit to figure out, which NSAID is better. Most of them only test like one or two. We're doing like five. And what's the, certain adaptations that we can maybe use for one NSAID but not another. So that's the grand idea there.
Yeah, I think that's useful because it's, again, kind of similar to the training at long muscle lengths maybe, and saying, hey, we're seeing, I know a lot of like resistance training protocols are, maybe the study's only up to 12 weeks. It's like, but we We don't know if that continued, or there was that deload study, which you might have seen, where they deloaded, one group deloaded after like 4 weeks, 3 weeks, or 3 or 4 weeks of training, and then the other group didn't. But it's like, what if they just continued to do that and not take deloads versus deloading kind of every now and then? Like, who would see the outcome then? Like in the short term, we didn't really see anything. So it's like, hey, okay, it looks like there's this short term win in terms of pain reduction, but also potentially there's a long term cost here in muscle growth. But it's like you said, we haven't necessarily actually been we can't say that that's definitely the case.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that really surprised me when I started looking into NSAIDs was, you take them for pain, and for like physique or recreational or like even elite athletes, they take them for like muscle soreness. Like that's the predominant reason you probably take them. Maybe you got some other like soft tissue injuries or something. Um, but when you really look at the literature, they don't really help for muscle soreness. So then it's like, okay, well, if they're not going to help you, uh, analgesically, like feel better, then you must be taking them for inflammation. Or maybe you just don't know and you assume, right? You have that kind of placebo effect of, oh, I feel better because I took, ibuprofen or naproxen or something like that. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh wow. So I'm taking NSAIDs and they're not actually helping, but I'm still taking them just because it's something that I think society has, reached for a drug, and the physique world is way better about this than some others. Where it's like pain, reach for a drug. So I think that was the first thing I saw, and I was like, wow, okay, so we really need to look into what are these NSAIDs doing, and when do we want to use them? Because if they're not even helping with like muscle pain, like what if they're hurting long term potentially, why are we even taking them in the first place? And so that's what I've kind of started talking to athletes and a lot of different populations about is, do you need that? Or you just like, is it a habit? Is it something that like your parents told you, here, take this way back in the day, and you just like never really thought about it, and now you're an athlete or something like that, and your coach says, yeah, take some drugs, you'll be fine. Put some ice on it, walk it off. So I think when I saw that, I was like, ooh, there's definitely something here. And so moving on to like long and short term, kind of going back to that, there's two studies. One is, I think it's 12 weeks, and they take like a low dose NSAID, so ibuprofen for like 400 milligrams, which is about a third of the max dose you would give or take. And they did a bunch of bicep. It's a bicep curl study, which is awesome. But they did, 12 weeks. They only took it right before their workout, like you would if you were kind of feeling a little soreness. And they didn't really see any changes or like prevention of muscle growth. So that's like one side of the coin where it's like, okay, maybe low dose, like if you're going to take it, maybe just don't take the maximum dose. And I don't know about you, but I generally don't reach for the maximum dose of anything. So then, there's another study that did like the max dose, and they're like, all right, well, this is blunting some of those adaptations we want. So I think that's the other area we're trying to figure out. It's like, okay, if we take, a low or high dose, does it matter? Yeah, probably. So
yeah, that makes sense. Like, what's the saying, that the kind of devil's in the dose, or like the poison's in the dose type of thing. Like everything's poisonous if you have enough of it. So it's like here, if you just have a small amount, maybe you can kind of abate the risks and concerns. Is there anything, I remember hearing something along the lines of when, depending on the age of the population, it seemed to have differentiating effects, and there was maybe something to, I don't know, as you get older, injuries and things crop up a bit more. So if it helped with pain tolerance for those individuals, they could actually see a beneficial impact of taking such a thing. Has that been looked at? Am I right in thinking that? I just remember that at some point came up.
yeah, you're 100% right. And so that's where the literature is kind of like trying to figure out the differences between young, healthy people and like older adults who, maybe have some like level of basal inflammation. So we call it inflammation, where you kind of just like have this like very low, moderate systemic level of inflammation that contributes to all kind of problems like fat gain, osteoarthritis, all things like that. And so when you see older adults take it, you're right, it kind of dampens that like normal inflammation they might have. And so then it's like, okay, the muscles no longer dealing with, and their bodies are no longer dealing with this fight against normal inflammation. Now they can use those resources to grow muscle or get stronger or whatever that may be. And that's where you really have to look at the nuance in some of these studies is, yeah, actually, there's 2 or 3 studies that show maybe it's beneficial for older adults with some kind of background inflammation, we'll call it.
That makes sense. And I guess you could further apply that to younger people who maybe are in a situation where they're like in that sort of inflammation state, but it might be something that's not a chronic, it might be like an acute case. So do you have any like practical recommendations for people that you work with, like a use case, when to have it, dosages, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So I would say most of the literature is based around like ibuprofen, so Motrin and Advil. Um, and that's where that one specifically seems to potentially cause some adaptation problems, whether it be muscle growth or other things. So what I've started to do is kind of steer people more towards acetaminophen or Tylenol. It's paracetamol in your country. So there's all these names. I have like a list over here. I'm like, there's like 30 different versions of these things.
Yeah.
And they all have like brand names. I'm like, make sure you pronounce that one right. Or mention that one. So yeah, I steer people towards that acetaminophen a little more now because you get the pain effect. It also influences the same enzymes, but not as much, the COX enzymes. And I always generally tell people like, all right, if you're not injured or you're not like seeing a doctor and they're telling you take these NSAIDs, right? You're not prescribed medically. Just go for like the minimum dose you can, and that's generally going to be safer. So if it's one pill, right before your workouts, or maybe in the morning when you get up or something, or like maybe before you go to sleep to kind of ease some of that pain, that's probably what I would recommend. But it's pretty nuanced too. So.
Yeah, with paracetamol, and that's Tylenol, right? Which I've heard of both. So I think paracetamol, from what I remember, it's not like anti-inflammatory. So I think that's where you mentioned it's not having the same impact. So if I try and avoid them as much as I can, just off the little I knew about them, and being like that kind of guy that's like, I got to maximize hypertrophy at all costs. Like, I'm not going to take these unless I really have to. So if I've got like a headache or something, I will do my best not to kind of take something. But if I do, I tended to go towards paracetamol and then taking like half the dose versus the recommended dose is like 2 for an adult of the capsules. I don't know how much it is. So that sort of thing is the kind of the route you would go down for people, is like take the non-anti-inflammatory one, less of the dose, and only if you really have to.
Yeah. Especially if you're just like kind of sore. A lot of the studies use like muscle damaging protocols, and that's, I think, especially for your audience, like that's not necessarily what we're doing. It's not like we're going into the gym and just like completely destroying our muscles with a bunch of eccentrics on exercises we've never done. And so when you go to kind of extrapolate that, it's like, all right, so it may influence inflammation, great, knock it down. Of course, that's what it's used for. But like you and I, when we go to the gym, we're probably not inducing a ton of inflammation. So yeah, that's the way I would lean now is more towards that acetaminophen, versus, your NSAIDs. There's even over here, there's this like not push. There's a lot of prescribed NSAIDs. And in athlete and military populations, they'll go like full maximum dose for like 6 weeks or like 4 weeks. And that's, I think, where you really have to be careful. That's again for treatment purposes. So I actually myself was on 1,200 milligrams of ibuprofen for like 6 weeks, and I was like, this is rough. Like I can feel, you just don't feel quite right. But it worked, and like that did what it was supposed to. I had some inflammation like in my heart, so I took care of that, and I was like, cool, yeah. But if it's not that, if it's just training purposes, it's just kind of minimum dose it is what I tell people.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm glad you got through it and you're okay. And obviously that's a use case where you'd be a crazy person not to kind of follow your doctor's guidelines there.
Yeah.
Is there I was just going to say, is there a consequence of, my head's going down the line of, you increase your pain tolerance, but your body is giving you pain for a reason, if it's like joint or connective tissue pain. So you reduce the pain tolerance, and so then you push. Is there then potentially a longer term cost of, hey, now you've actually just made something worse. Now you feel the pain like double down, sort of like you're tired, you take caffeine, but then you hit this kind of just crash.
Yeah. So that's one of the areas that we're looking into also. It's basically overuse injuries where
Yeah.
I can now do more, or in the military case, it's like, hey, I have to do this thing. To get through this thing, I need to take these NSAIDs. And now because I can do the thing, I go longer, harder, and more volume, essentially. And that's going to cause some kind of real like overuse injury. So you see a lot of the muscle is pretty plastic, so it kind of adapts fairly quickly. But like soft tissue injuries, um, kind of those niggling injuries that really don't ever go away, like elbows, shoulders, connective tissue, like you said. So yeah, and that's the trouble with it. But if you use it smart, I think you can kind of, get around some of that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, it's definitely like individual to individual like use case scenario, and I imagine for a lot of people listening, at least in my experience, it's something where you probably don't have to consider using it unless like the doctor's like suggesting it. Otherwise, outside of that, you can probably get away, like you said, with very low doses, and it shouldn't therefore be an issue. It's short term, low dose, nothing to stress too much about in terms of impacting long term adaptations.
Yeah, yeah, and we're trying to find alternatives too. So, um, like, yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but like tart cherry juice is a big one where it's like take it, it reduces inflammation a little bit. It's not the same mechanisms. So if we can find something that you can still get some of the pain reduction benefit from, but it's a different mechanism. Maybe it doesn't influence the muscle protein synthesis aspects as much. That would be a nice alternative too. That's probably a couple years down the line or more, but there are other things you can take. Tart cherry juice being one of them. So I've actually started using it a little bit, and like the evidence isn't super strong. I just wanted to like anecdotally test it and like, does this help? And for DOMs, I think it did. My wife took it too, and she's like, I think it helps, but I don't know. So, N of one, there's some alternatives. Maybe explore a little bit. Might be worth doing.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We create the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
Yeah, I've seen tart cherry juice also for sleep, I think. Like, does it have quite a bit of melatonin within it too?
Yeah, yeah. That's the other thing. I tried that recently, because self-experimenter over here, and I sleep really easily and well, so I don't have sleep problems. Like I'll lay down and like 3 minutes later I'm passed out.
Good.
Yeah. But I think I haven't looked at the literature recently on sleep, but I think some people are using it for that.
Yeah. And you mentioned some others. Is there anything else people can use as opposed to like tart cherry juice or using the NSAIDs? Is there other ways that you kind of would advise your clients to go down in terms of recovery that won't have the potential negative outcomes that we're looking to kind of circumvent?
Yeah, so I think like massage is a pretty good one, especially for muscle. There's a lot of literature coming out, or it's been out. It's kind of like in different populations again. Sometimes we read the literature and we're like, okay, so in older people it does this, in injured people it does this, and in healthy people it does this. So we kind of like blend them and try to figure out what's going on. But there's a good bit of research showing that massage kind of helps muscles recover. And I was surprised by that because I was like, it feels good. but is it actually doing anything in the muscle? And then we had a scientist come present, and they had like muscle data, and I was like, oh, okay, it's actually doing something. So this is an area where somebody needs to dive in and really like look at, from a hypertrophy standpoint, because they were doing it not from a hypertrophy standpoint. They're just like recovery. So I think that's one. The cold stuff is, again, it's case use, and you don't want to go do cryotherapy, but a little bit of ice to reduce inflammation on an actual injury helps sometimes. Heat ice, kind of that old school rice, rest, ice, elevate, and compress. There's not, that paradigm's also shifting a little bit, but most of the time it'll get you through, versus taking like a drug or something. So
I can remember we have a physio on our team, Mike Chalice, and he was recommending to use ice. Like, I had a knee issue, so I was using ice like before. Well, I was using it around workouts, but then particularly like in the morning before a workout. And then I have one of the Theraguns, because I don't have somewhere I can go get a massage, and I don't have anyone at home that can do that for me in the moment. So I was just using like the Theragun around my knee, and it seemed to have some acute benefit there. Whether or not some of it's placebo, maybe some of it is driven down the lines of like similar to massage or something like that. But at least anecdotally, I've seen those things to be useful. And then obviously, you will probably say this too, like a warm up. Like the number of people I just see, they just load up with plates and they don't warm up, and I'm like, that's certainly not going to be helping.
Yeah. I had a good reminder of that. So I play a lot of soccer, and like, so that's my two loves, like bodybuilding and soccer, and they always kind of conflict a little bit. But I had recently, I'm getting older. I'm not old, but like the warm up really like needs to be done. Or like mid game, I'll be like, ooh, yeah, I didn't warm up properly this game. Maybe I'm feeling it. And a lot of clients don't warm up, and it's, as a young like college age kid, like I didn't either. I'll be like truthful with you. But then as I've like gotten older and more seasoned and kind of learned my body a little bit, it's like, no, a good, strategic warm up for maybe upper body or lower body. You don't have to do it if you're not working it out, obviously. Goes a long way, even like 5 to 7 minutes, super long way.
Do you have like a general, just because I always say it, like I say, yeah, do a warm up, and I think people know how to warm up, but I'm surprised by the number of people that don't really understand what like a good warm up entails for like hypertrophy training. Maybe do you have like a general guideline you give, maybe like an upper or lower body one to your clients and one you follow yourself?
Yeah, so if it's upper body, usually I'll go get on the rower for like 90 seconds or so, and just kind of work. And it's completely wrong for rowing, but work different like muscles. So I'll pull like high or low, or switch my grip a little bit, just to get some blood flow and muscle temperature up, and like body temperature up, because that's the whole goal, is like elevate your tissue temperature so it's ready to get into different ranges of motion. So for upper body, I'll row for a little bit. Usually I'll do some like was it I's, Y's, and T's, some like rotator cuff stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's a pain point for me, and most people. And then after that, I'll usually just do like a really light set of a couple of the first exercises. If it's a lat pull down and a seated row, I'll just do like, okay, we're gonna do like 40% of what I'm doing, and just do like 5 to 10 reps. And then go from there. I think once you get like through the first couple exercises in your workout, you're pretty warm, right? Especially if you're doing, different muscle groups. So that's what I would recommend for like an upper body. For a lower body, usually I'll like walk. Usually I walk to the gym. So that's a bit of a warm up, but then maybe hop on a cycle for, again, 1 to 3 minutes, nothing really long. And then do a little bit of mobility work. So I have like hip stuff for my PT, where it's a couple different stretches that works pretty well. And sometimes even like a little foam rolling to get that range of motion effect, which is useful when squatting, right? For example. And then again, just a couple exercises, go through them, kind of warm up a little bit. Nothing super fancy. It's not like, if you remember Kelly Starrett's, his like book of stuff, it's like not that in depth. It's just, yeah.
I've got it on the shelf.
Yeah, definitely went through a phase in college with that, but pieces of that are useful. So I think if you can figure out your body and where you're struggling, maybe, and just hit that before your session, that's fine. Like I said, 3 to 7 minutes, somewhere in there. Doesn't make your workout super long. You're not doing a whole mobility session. And that's what I do personally, and then that's what I tell most of my athletes and stuff.
Yeah, I was literally, as you brought up his name just before I was about, as you were going to stop, I was going to like, did you ever like do the supple leopard and have all of that? And there was that time where people were spending like the length of their half their session was warming up, and I was certainly there where I was like, I got to foam roll everything. I've got to do like, I can't remember what it was. I had like I bought lacrosse balls, and then I'd make a peanut out of 2 of them and like do that down my T-spine, and man, it was just a lot of wasted time. And I ended up bruising a rib because I was like foam rolling it so hard, I was using the lacrosse ball so hard, I ended up like bruising a rib, which just then took me out of the gym. So yeah, you can take it too far as well.
Yeah. And I think that's dialed back, that was a while ago, but
Yeah.
Every time I tell the coaches and the athletes, I'm like, every time something gets really popular, like definitely try it, like experiment a little bit, but then take what you think really helps out of whatever that new thing is and just kind of keep it. Be like, I learned this one exercise or this one hand switch or something, and then just put it in your toolbox for later, because like you'll use it eventually. So
do you like any dynamic stretching, like arm swings, leg swings, like lunging or something?
Yeah. I try to do, so I'll do like just basic arm rotations for upper body. It looks super silly. Like you like walking around and like swinging your arms everywhere and like leaning on a pole and like stretching your pec a little bit. And so yeah, I think that's very beneficial, especially with the lower body, and like you said, leg swings for squats. Those really help my just mobility, just like to get a little deeper, feel it a little bit better. I do love that.
Yeah. It's I think what you said there's brilliant. That's also the way I tend to prescribe warm-ups too. And it doesn't have to be super long, comprehensive. Like you said, it's like minutes of time. It's not like half an hour that you have to be spending here. And like you said, individualizing it, you've got particular like your rotator cuffs are an issue. Maybe they have another area that they really have to stretch out and kind of make sure it's very warm. Like my knee, I was doing extra warm-ups on that to make sure that was good. And then the thing you touched on, I just want to double down on it so people know that part, is that kind of acclimation of load and reps like dropping off. So you do a small percentage of your working weight and you slowly go up to it, reducing the reps. So it's not fatiguing, it's a warm-up, but you do work up to that weight. You don't just suddenly like go from free bar to like 100 kilos, whatever it is that you're trying to work with.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I've learned again over time. It's like those little things really add up and help your like longevity. Because as physique athletes, we have it pretty good in terms of overuse injuries. Like usually their shoulder or maybe like a knee occasionally, but like we don't put a ton of stress on a lot of our joints because we're working mostly in those upper ranges. Like strength matters, yes, but you're not a power lifter necessarily. Like everybody has their phases. So you have that freedom of saying, hey, I enjoy this exercise in this 10 to 15 rep range. And this other one I really like in this like 8 to 10 or 15 to 20. So I use those to kind of optimize each exercise too, because we know that it's good to have like different levels of reps, hit different like aspects of the muscle, but also like it doesn't really make a huge difference in terms of volume. So that's the other thing that I've kind of grown into over the past, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. No, that makes tons of sense. So to shift gears a bit, I think we've probably covered, is there anything else you wanted to say about NSAIDs and that element, or?
I think we're good. I would just say keep an eye out. There will be a couple papers probably coming out over the next 6 months from my group to really look at some of the mechanism stuff and like soreness and when and where, how to use them. So
awesome. No, that'd be really helpful for people because, like you said, there's not really clear guidelines out there. It's just like the general discussion has been the one that we said before, where it's like they maybe aren't the greatest to use. And so I think even your practical take homes from this already has been helpful. And you do a great job. I imagine you'll post it on your Instagram as well. And you do a great job posting kind of almost research reviews over on your Instagram with the infographics. And that's something I was going to, if we had time for it, I was going to ask you about Collagen, which I know you recently did like a series of posts about it. And that's, again, something probably similar to NSAIDs that's kind of come up and been spoken about and then kind of moves out of favor. And I think a lot of people, when they think of collagen, they just think, hey, it's a like terrible protein source, don't use it. And they don't really think much of it past that. But I know that you've looked into it a bit further in terms of, are there any other use cases? So I'd love to hear kind of, again, framing it for physique athletes, like what role could collagen play for them?
Yeah. So I feel like when I was initially looking at collagen, I was like, yeah, this is an inferior protein, like duh. And then, so, you see the big fitness people talk about it and it's like, this is garbage. And I'm like, okay, let's look at this from a different angle. And the angle I took was like rehab. Because again, military perspective, people get injured. How can we help them get better outside of just the muscle, right? Because muscle recovers pretty well. And so as I'm looking through this, I'm like, okay, so the main differences are the amino acid profile. And when you look at proline and hydroproline, there's glycine, those aren't as high in like whey. So that's the biggest difference between them. And when you look at whey, it's like leucine, isoleucine, BCAAs, right? Gold standard and your essential amino acids. And so that's the big difference. But when you look at the, like, what is your tendons and collagen and cartilage and all of this stuff made of, it's like, well, it's collagen. It's not muscle fibers. It's just different components of proteins. And so then I was like, well, okay, so if we ignore the fact that muscle protein synthesis, like, yes, collagen's not good for it, and we look more from a recovery and rehab side, is it helping with joint recovery or tendon or different things like that? And there's some preliminary data, and that's why I kind of dug into it, where it seems to help osteoarthritis in older adults, right? It seems to help rehab in athletes. It seems to help kind of all of these different things, like Achilles tendon repair. There's a study where it helps in that. And I'm like, all right. And then Keith Barr, who's it's like another muscle researcher, but it's kind of like recently delved into other tissues, had a beautiful study where he gave people collagen as gelatin, and then had them jump rope and looked at kind of collagen synthesis, and it was up compared to like the placebo. So he didn't have like a way, but that wasn't the point of the study. So it's like, all right, now there's not only this good body research, but there's these people that I really trust in like their scientific rigor doing things, showing, oh, maybe it is beneficial. So that's what kind of drove it. And that's what I would say, like, if you're in rehab or you're having a lot of trouble with recovery in your joints, your tendons, maybe even your bones, things like that, stress fractures, there's a good potential use for it. I'm actually writing a big grant right now to really figure out, again, like the NSAIDs, where and when does it beneficial? Because if it is, it's super simple, right? It's like you just have a little, like, you could even combo it with your whey, right? Just throw a little protein shake, throw some collagen in there and see what happens. So I think there's potential, and that's why I covered it basically on Instagram.
I remember a while ago, and that name Keith Barr rings a bell.
Yeah.
I remember seeing someone, I can't remember who it was. They were basically making jelly pre-workout, like with the gelatin, and then putting their pre-workout in it and eating it as like their pre-workout, which was kind of wild to me. So at the moment, with kind of the application that's kind of been studied, is it something that you use at like pre-workout? And am I right in thinking vitamin C is sometimes something you take with that?
Yeah, and that's another thing we're trying to figure out is normally it's so standard dosage would be like 15 grams of collagen with, I think it's 200 milligrams of vitamin C. So not a ton, but enough to kind of activate some of the enzymes you need pre-workout. Yeah. And so I don't actually use it like right now. I did a little bit when I was rehabbing some stuff. Whether it helped or not, I honestly, I couldn't tell, but it was worth, there's enough evidence for me to test it out a little bit. But again, yeah, 15 grams right before a workout with some vitamin C.
Yeah. And so when you're thinking about 15 grams, like it's not a lot in terms of like, oh no, it's a low quality protein source. But I guess if you wanted to, you could just say, hey, don't count that towards your total protein if you don't want to. But equally 15 grams for someone who, like probably most of us, overdo protein a little bit. If we were getting 1 gram per pound, we're probably still fine if 15 grams are coming from a lower quality source.
Yeah, and that's what I would say. Like, just don't count it, or like count it and your proteins. I've the clients and coaches and stuff I've been working with recently, it's like everybody loves protein. Like,
Yes.
it's like you're getting plenty of protein. Don't worry, you're fine.
Yeah. Is there different types of collagen to be aware of? Like, does that impact anything? Is that coming to it?
So there are different types, and I don't even have like I should have included like a recommended brand or something. But I think the main factors are high levels of glycine and proline, and I don't even have like milligrams, right? So like for leucine, it's like you want 3 grams. Like I don't even have that number for those
Sure.
those amino acids because we just don't know. But I think as long as they're the predominant, which they should be in collagen, amino acids, you should be fine. And the 15-gram dose really covers, like it's like saying 45 grams of whey protein. Whereas you may not need 45, you probably need like 30-ish, but you're covering yourself just in case.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And that's nice because that kind of ties into the discussion around NSAIDs. Like it's maybe someone who is dealing with some of these connective tissue issues, they could try adding in some collagen there. And from what I've seen, it's not, I mean, actually, as far as I'm aware, it's pretty cheap. Like it's not an expensive protein because it's kind of a waste product, I guess, for a lot of like on animal proteins.
Yeah, definitely. So it might be worth it. Not for everybody, but some people.
Yeah. Awesome. And then is there anything else you're personally working on that you can kind of, I guess, give us insights into, or anything within like our space that is taking your interest over the last few months?
Yeah, so I am really interested in some of and I follow the hypertrophy work like pretty closely. And it's funny because I actually review, like peer review a lot of those papers because I'm not like, I don't work with a lot of those people anymore. Like I still, talk to Helms and Schoenfeld all the time, and Trex and people, but it's just like, you need people to review those studies who have the expertise. So I always get like the first peek at them and I'm like, ooh, this is going to be good. And then you see them come across social media and stuff like that. So I think, interested in how the stretch mediated hypertrophy stuff is going to pan out. Still interested in like the optimal volume arguments. It's like 12 to 20 sets per muscle group per group. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area. And then actually, so the deload stuff, I would love to do a deload study. I think I might be able to. I put one in for a grant,
Awesome.
and it didn't get picked up yet, but we'll see. Because that actual deload study that Schoenfeld did stemmed from a conversation we had at like one of the conferences. It's like, yeah, I'd really like to do deload stuff. He's like, actually, I've got a student who wants to do it, and I was like, this is how I would set it up. And so I think they did it differently, but it was like the beginning of like this line of research on deloads, and I was like, that's super cool. Because I use them probably every 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the volume.
Sure.
And then, some people do it 4 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever. But that's another space that I'm really interested in. In terms of like things that I am researching, so the NSAID stuff is taking the bulk of my time right now, just writing all the research results up and stuff. Have a couple different proposals, like one for collagen going in. I'm really interested in kind of the body recomposition world. So if you look at, and this is, your audience will find this entertaining, one of the biggest studies ever published on body recomposition was just probably like a year or two ago. And it was in people joining the military and going through basic combat training. And so you have like these Gen Pop people who lose like 3 pounds of fat and gain like 3 or 4 pounds of muscle. And they're not even like hypertrophy training. They're just like exercising. So that was pretty cool to see too. So I think that's about it in terms of like different things going on. We always have stuff like side projects going. I will eventually circle back to like the hypertrophy world and do some research there. Like I'm doing some supplement research or some like drug research now, that's, applicable, but it's always a good time. So
yeah, no, that makes so much sense. And yeah, it must be interesting from your perspective as well. Like, I always think it's interesting for the people who are doing the research who then see it come through social media, but then you're like seeing it just before it goes to social media as well. So you get to see how everyone's like their takes on it and everything. And that must be super interesting and nice as well to be kind of ahead of that too in some ways. I guess out of interest, I guess you've probably seen, or you would have seen it, Zach Robinson, his meta-aggression, looking at kind of the relative proximity to failure and hypertrophy. Did that spark any new ideas or thoughts on your end?
So I need to really sit down, and I like skimmed it, but I didn't.
Oh, yeah, it's a big paper.
Yeah, I didn't review it, and I was like, okay, I need some time, like some coffee, and like to really chew on this. The meta-aggression meta-analyses. There's always, because I review a lot of those in different fields. There's always some caveats of like, hey, this study was in there, but why was it in there? Not that they're doing anything wrong, but like even in the Stu Phillips study where they said like 1.6 gram per kilograms, and they had that nice like meta-aggression that cut off. I'm like, actually, those two studies weren't, like, these two studies weren't included and these two were, and I don't really understand why. So I do want to like chew on it for a bit to figure out what's going on, because I do think that's an area that, hey, if we need to go to failure, if we don't train close, basically we've always told people, or I have, it's like you want to be pretty close to failure, but like if you don't go to failure, you'll probably get a little more volume, like RPE 9, right? So I'm interested in that too. Yeah, maybe I'll cover that for my next social media post week.
Ooh,
yeah,
cool.
Actually, it's good. It's a good idea.
Yeah, it's kind of that optimization question of like, because you have to rob Peter to pay Paul type of thing. If we're doing more like close to failure training, we probably can't do as many sets, and like what's the best trade-off between the two. And so it's just a question, an optimization question. And I don't know, it kind of just made me think, hey, it kind of validates why I see like anecdotally so many people who maybe train very close to failure or failure very often but with lower volumes do so well still, because it looked like maybe they're too far down that end, but maybe they're not, and maybe they're just having a different road to Rome in a sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Brandon, thank you so much for taking the time and like just kind of digging into the NSAID stuff and having a really comprehensive review of that. Now, if I have anyone who asks me about it, I know exactly where to send them, which is perfect. If people want to keep up to date with everything you're doing, I mentioned your Instagram, definitely let them know.
Yeah, so I think most of the stuff is going to be on Instagram. I create content for like Weightology and the CSO over at Tailored Coaching Method. So I have a lot of stuff going on. So it's kind of like scattered. But Instagram usually is where it ends up. I'm on Twitter too. I think I even have an old one. Yeah. Or X. What is it called? That's what they're called, right?
Oh, it might have changed. Yeah, I don't even know now. Yeah. I'm not up to date.
Anyway, but you can always shoot me a DM on Instagram and like I'll respond. So
amazing. Yeah, thank you so much again, Brandon. I'll make sure the Instagram's definitely there, and any other links that are important to you, I'll have them down there too. And guys, thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality, and we know how to do it, and we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut Movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.